Raise your glass to Ethan Carter, the man who had everything once and somehow lost it all. The laughter came before Ethan even reached his seat. It rolled beneath the chandeliers of the Grand Oak Country Club, mixing with the clink of crystal glasses and the soft hum of old classmates greeting one another after 15 years apart. Ethan stopped beside the table, one hand resting gently on his daughter Lily's shoulder. He wore a navy suit that had been carefully pressed that afternoon, though the cuffs were slightly worn. Lily, 9 years old, held his hand and looked around at the polished marble floors, the expensive dresses, and the men comparing watches as if they were comparing trophies. "Dad," she whispered, "why is everyone laughing?" Ethan gave her a small smile. "They're remembering old stories, sweetheart." Across the room, Ryan Whitmore lifted his glass higher. Ryan had once been the loudest boy in their graduating class. Now he owned a successful real estate company, drove a black Mercedes, and seemed to have collected every symbol of success Ethan had not. "Come on, Ethan," Ryan called. "Don't be shy. We haven't seen you in years. Tell everyone what you've been up to." Ethan walked closer. "Not much," he said. "I work at a repair shop. I raise my daughter." A few people smiled politely. Ryan laughed. "Still fixing cars?" Another voice joined him. "After all that talent." A third person added, "I thought you'd be running a company by now." Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment. Not because he was ashamed, because Lily was watching. He had learned a long time ago that dignity was sometimes the quietest answer a person could give. Ryan stepped closer with an amused smile. "You remember college, Ethan? You were supposed to be the brilliant one. Everyone thought you'd make millions." Ethan nodded. "Plans change." "Apparently," Ryan said. The laughter returned. Lily squeezed her father's fingers. "We can go home." Ethan looked down at her. "We don't leave because someone forgot how to respect us." His voice was soft enough that only she heard it. Then he straightened and faced the room again. "I'm glad everyone is doing well." That simple sentence seemed to confuse them more than anger ever could. Ryan had expected embarrassment, maybe an argument. Instead, Ethan offered nothing but calm. He turned toward the table where Lily's dinner waited, unaware that someone had been watching him from across the ballroom. Near the entrance stood Nathaniel Brooks, one of the wealthiest men in the country, surrounded by two assistants who had stopped speaking. Nathaniel's eyes were fixed on Ethan. His expression had changed completely. He looked past the expensive suits, past the laughter, past the people who had gathered around Ryan. Then he quietly asked one question. "Are you certain that's him?" One assistant glanced toward Ethan and nodded. "Yes, Mr. Brooks. Ethan Carter." Nathaniel said nothing. For a moment, he simply stood there, listening to the laughter that had once again begun around the table. Then his gaze fell on the little girl holding Ethan's hand. Something in his face softened. He set his untouched glass on a nearby table. And without calling his security team, without waiting for an introduction, the billionaire began walking directly across the crowded room toward the man everyone else had decided was a failure. The laughter had not completely faded when Ethan returned to his table with Lily. He pulled out her chair, placed a napkin beside her plate, and made sure she had everything she needed before sitting down. Across the ballroom, old classmates continued talking, but Ethan noticed something had changed. People were no longer laughing as loudly. Some were watching him. Others were watching the entrance. Nathaniel Brooks was still walking toward them, but Ethan did not know that yet. His mind had already drifted somewhere else, back to a much smaller house, a much quieter life, and the years when every dollar had mattered. 15 years earlier, Ethan Carter had been the student everyone remembered. He had been the one who stayed after class to solve problems no one else could understand. He had been offered opportunities that could have taken him across the country. He had once believed that success meant building something impressive, earning enough money to never worry again, and making his name matter. Then life had asked him a different question. His wife became ill. Their plans changed. The interviews stopped. The career opportunities were postponed, then forgotten. Ethan chose to stay. He chose hospital rooms over conference rooms, grocery lists over business meetings, and eventually, a little girl who needed a father more than the world needed another ambitious executive. After his wife passed away, Ethan never tried to explain his choices. He simply worked, paid the bills, packed Lily's lunches, helped with homework, and learned how to make ordinary days feel safe. He became a mechanic because he was good with his hands, and because the work allowed him to be home when Lily needed him. It was not the life he had imagined, but it was a life filled with purpose. At the reunion, none of that appeared on the surface. Ryan saw an old classmate who had not become wealthy. The others saw a worn suit, an ordinary watch, and a man who arrived without a company name attached to his introduction. They did not see the nights Ethan had spent sitting beside Lily when she was sick. They did not see the school projects he finished after closing the shop. They did not see the quiet promises he had kept when nobody was watching. Lily looked up from her plate. "Dad, did you really know all those people?" Ethan smiled. "A long time ago. Were you friends?" He paused. "Some of them." Lily studied his face. "Are you sad?" Ethan shook his head. "No, sweetheart." Then he looked toward the ballroom, where Ryan was still talking with several former classmates. "People remember the version of you that fits their story. That does not mean they know the truth." Lily seemed to think about that. Then she reached for his hand beneath the table. Ethan squeezed it gently. He had no idea that across the room, Nathaniel Brooks had stopped moving. The billionaire was staring at an old photograph someone had placed near the reunion display. His fingers tightened around the edge of the frame. In the photograph, a younger Ethan stood beside a group of engineering students. And beside him stood Nathaniel Brooks, 15 years younger, smiling at the same man everyone in the ballroom had just called a failure. The photograph remained in Nathaniel Brooks's hand for several seconds. The ballroom around him seemed to fade into a distant murmur, replaced by a memory he had not allowed himself to revisit in years. Ethan Carter had looked younger then, thinner, almost restless with ambition. He had stood beside a whiteboard covered in numbers and engineering diagrams, explaining a problem that had confused Nathaniel's senior advisors for weeks. "You are sure this will work?" Nathaniel had asked him back then. Ethan had smiled. "I am sure the numbers are telling us something." That moment had been the beginning of a relationship that never had the chance to become what either man expected. Nathaniel remembered offering Ethan a position at Brooks Holdings. Not a small position, a serious one, a chance to build a career that could have changed his entire future. Ethan had thanked him, then asked for time. 2 days later, he declined. Nathaniel had never forgotten the reason. Ethan's wife was sick, and he had decided that his place was beside her. At the time, Nathaniel had respected the decision. Then life became complicated. Ethan disappeared from the professional world, and Nathaniel eventually lost track of him. Until tonight. Across the ballroom, Ethan was helping Lily cut her food into smaller pieces. He looked nothing like the ambitious young man in the photograph, yet Nathaniel knew the eyes. The same calm focus, the same habit of listening before speaking, the same quiet certainty that had impressed him years ago. Nathaniel turned toward his assistant. "How long have you been searching for him?" "Almost 3 years, sir." "And you are certain?" "His records match. His daughter is Lily Carter. He works at a repair shop in town. Everything is confirmed." Nathaniel looked back at Ethan. "He never told anyone?" "Not that we could find." Something about that answer troubled Nathaniel. Not because Ethan had hidden his past, but because he had never used it. He could have mentioned Brooks Holdings. He could have named Nathaniel. He could have turned one old connection into a better job, a larger house, an easier life. Instead, he had built his world quietly. At the table, Ryan Whitmore was still enjoying the attention. He leaned towards several classmates and said, "The funny thing is, Ethan was always convinced he was going to change the world." One woman laughed softly. "Maybe he still thinks he will." Ryan shook his head. "Some people just never know when to give up on an old dream." Ethan heard every word. His face remained calm. Lily looked at him again. "Dad." "Yes." "Why are they being mean?" Ethan took a slow breath. "Sometimes people feel better when they think someone else is beneath them." Lily frowned. "That is not nice." "No," Ethan said gently. "It is not." Then Ryan turned toward him once more. "Ethan, come on. You cannot sit there all night pretending none of this bothers you." The room quieted slightly. Ethan stood. He did not raise his voice. He did not defend his past. He simply looked at Ryan and said, "I am not pretending. Ryan smiled as though he had finally found an opening. Then tell everyone what happened to the brilliant Ethan Carter. Ethan looked down at Lily, then back at the room. For a moment, nobody spoke. And from across the ballroom, Nathaniel Brooks finally started walking toward them. The room had gone strangely quiet. Ethan remained standing beside his chair, one hand resting lightly on the back of it, while Ryan waited for an answer that he believed would finally expose him. "Well," Ryan asked, "what happened, Ethan?" Ethan looked around the ballroom. Familiar faces stared back at him. People he had once studied with, laughed with, and dreamed beside. Now they were waiting for a confession of failure. Ethan could have told them about the hospital rooms. He could have told them about the nights when his wife needed him and the mornings when he still went to work. He could have explained every difficult decision, every missed opportunity, every bill he had paid one at a time. But dignity did not require a courtroom. "Life happened," Ethan said quietly. Ryan tilted his head. "That is all. That is enough." A few people looked down at their glasses. Someone cleared his throat. Ryan gave a small laugh. "You always were good at making simple answers sound important." Lily slipped her hand into her father's. Ethan looked down at her and smiled. "Thank you for being patient," he whispered. Then Ryan stepped closer to the microphone. "Everyone here remembers Ethan as the smartest person in our class. We thought he would become someone important. Instead, he chose a repair shop." The words settled heavily across the room. Ethan said nothing. He did not need to. The truth was already standing inside him, even if no one else could see it. Then the ballroom doors opened wider behind the crowd. Nathaniel Brooks continued walking. He was not hurried. He did not need to be. Conversations stopped one by one as people recognized him. A woman near the entrance whispered his name. Another guest turned completely around. Ryan's smile disappeared. Nathaniel Brooks did not look at Ryan. He did not look at the microphone. His attention remained fixed on Ethan. Ethan finally noticed him. Their eyes met across the room. For one brief second, Ethan looked confused. Then something changed in his expression. Recognition. Not complete recognition, but enough to bring an old memory to the surface. A young executive office. A whiteboard covered in numbers. A powerful man asking a young engineer to stay. Ethan had not seen Nathaniel in more than a decade. Nathaniel stopped several feet away. He looked at Lily first, then back at Ethan. "Ethan Carter?" His voice was calm, but the entire room seemed to hear it. Ethan nodded. "Yes." Nathaniel smiled faintly. "It really is you." Ryan glanced between them. "You know him?" Nathaniel did not answer immediately. He looked at Ethan's worn watch, then at the photograph still resting in his assistant's hand. "I have been looking for you," he said. Ethan's brow tightened. "Why?" Nathaniel took another step forward. "Because 12 years ago, you walked away from an opportunity that could have made you very wealthy." A murmur moved through the room. Ryan stared at Ethan. The same man he had just called a failure was now standing in front of one of America's most powerful billionaires. Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment. "That was a long time ago." Nathaniel shook his head. "Not to me." The room fell completely silent. Then Nathaniel extended his hand. "I never forgot what you did for my company. I never forgot what you did for my company." Nathaniel's words seemed to hang in the air long after he finished speaking. Ethan looked at him quietly, almost as if he were trying to place the memory inside a much older part of his life. Ryan stared at both men, his confidence slowly giving way to confusion. "What exactly did he do?" Ryan finally asked. Nathaniel turned toward him. "You do not remember?" Ryan swallowed. "Remember what?" Nathaniel looked back at Ethan. "That is not my story to tell." Ethan gave him a small nod, grateful for the restraint. Years ago, before Ethan became a mechanic and before Lily was born, he had been a young engineer with a mind that could see patterns other people missed. Brooks Holdings had been facing a complicated problem inside one of its largest projects. Several experienced professionals had studied the numbers and reached the same conclusion. The project could not be saved without enormous losses. Ethan had disagreed. He had spent 3 nights reviewing the data, checking every assumption, and following a small inconsistency that everyone else had overlooked. He finally found the answer. It was not glamorous. It was not dramatic. It was simply correct. Nathaniel had been impressed enough to offer him a senior position. Ethan remembered sitting in Nathaniel's office, looking through the glass at downtown Chicago and wondering what his future could become. The salary alone was more money than his family had ever had. The position could have changed everything. But that same week, Ethan received news that his wife needed him. He had gone home. He had stayed. He never regretted it. "You could have been one of the youngest executives in our company," Nathaniel said softly. "You had the talent. You had the opportunity. You had everything ahead of you." Ethan looked down at Lily. "I had something more important." Nathaniel nodded. "I know." Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "Wait, you turned down a position at Brooks Holdings?" Ethan did not answer. Nathaniel did. He did. Someone near the table whispered, "Why?" Nathaniel looked across the room. Because his wife was sick. The laughter was gone now. Completely. Even Ryan had lowered his eyes. Ethan gently touched Lily's shoulder. He had never wanted anyone to know the details. Not because he was ashamed, but because some sacrifices were not made for applause. They were made because someone you loved needed you. Nathaniel looked at Ethan again. "I searched for you for years." Ethan smiled faintly. "You did not have to." "I did." Nathaniel's voice became firmer. "People like you do not disappear without a reason." He paused. "And tonight, I finally understand the reason." Lily looked up at Nathaniel. "Are you Dad's friend?" Nathaniel smiled. "I would like to think so." Then he looked toward Ryan and the others. "But I think some people in this room need to understand something." No one moved. Nathaniel continued. "A man's value is not measured by his car, his house, his title, or his bank account." Ethan remained silent. Nathaniel looked directly at him. "Sometimes the greatest thing a person can build is a life where someone else feels loved and safe." Lily smiled. Ethan's eyes softened. Across the room, Ryan finally understood what he had been mocking. But Nathaniel was not finished. He reached into his jacket and removed a small photograph. "There is one more thing Ethan never told you." The photograph Nathaniel held was small, slightly faded at the edges, but the moment Ethan saw it, his expression changed. It showed a hospital room from 12 years earlier. Ethan was sitting beside his wife, his hand resting gently over hers, while a much younger Nathaniel Brooks stood near the doorway holding a folder. Lily was not in the picture yet. Ethan stared at it for several seconds. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Nathaniel answered quietly, "Your wife gave it to me." Ethan looked surprised. "She did?" Nathaniel nodded. "The last time I visited you both." The room seemed to grow even quieter. Ethan had almost forgotten that day. His wife had been tired, but she had smiled when Nathaniel arrived. She had told him something Ethan never knew she had shared. She said you were worried that leaving Brooks Holdings meant you had failed. Ethan lowered his eyes. Nathaniel continued. "She told me you had nothing to be ashamed of." Ethan took a slow breath. Those words brought back memories he had kept carefully tucked away. He remembered sitting beside his wife late at night, talking about ordinary things because neither of them wanted every conversation to become about illness or money. He remembered promising her that their daughter would grow up knowing that love was not measured by what a person could buy. Nathaniel looked at Lily. "Your father kept that promise." Lily smiled softly. Ryan stood several feet away, listening without saying a word. The people around him had stopped whispering. The same room that had laughed at Ethan minutes earlier now seemed uncomfortable with every memory of those jokes. Nathaniel turned toward the crowd. "You saw a mechanic tonight," he said. "You saw an old suit. You saw someone who did not arrive in a luxury car. And you decided you knew his story." No one answered. "You were wrong." Ethan shook his head gently. "Nathaniel, that is enough." Nathaniel looked at him. "No, I think they should hear this." Ethan remained quiet. Nathaniel continued. 12 years ago, Ethan saved my company from a decision that could have cost thousands of jobs. I offered him a position that would have changed his life. He declined it because his family needed him. A woman near the front whispered, "He gave all that up?" Nathaniel nodded. "Yes." Ryan finally spoke. His voice was smaller now. "Why did you never tell us?" Ethan looked at him. "Because I did not need you to believe me." That answer landed harder than any accusation could have. Ryan looked away. Ethan sat beside Lily again. She leaned against his shoulder. Nathaniel watched them for a moment before saying, "There is something else." Ethan looked up. "What?" Nathaniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a second document. I did not come here tonight just to thank you. Ethan's expression became cautious. Nathaniel placed the document on the table. I came because I want to offer you something. Ethan looked down at the page but did not touch it. Across the ballroom, every person seemed to be waiting for his answer. And for the first time that evening, Ryan realized the man he had mocked was not waiting for anyone's approval. The truth had already spoken for him. The document on the table was only 2 pages, but Ethan stared at it as though it carried the weight of another life. "What is this?" he asked. Nathaniel pulled out the chair beside him and sat down. "It is an offer to lead the Brooks Family Foundation's new national program for single-parent families." Ethan looked up. "You want me to run it? I want you to build it." Nathaniel's voice was calm. "You spent 12 years taking care of one family. I want you to help thousands of others find the support yours needed." Ethan looked back at the document. The salary was more than he had ever earned. The benefits were generous. The position included an office in Chicago, a travel budget, and resources most people could only dream about. But Ethan did not reach for the pen. Lily watched him carefully. "Dad," she whispered, "are we moving?" Ethan smiled. "I do not know yet." Ryan stood near the edge of the room, silent now. His earlier confidence had disappeared completely. He looked at Ethan, then at Nathaniel, and finally at the floor. For years, Ryan had believed success was something people could see. A bigger house, a better car, a more impressive title. Tonight, he was beginning to understand that he had confused visibility with value. Ethan finally looked at Nathaniel. "Why me?" Nathaniel answered without hesitation. "Because you know what it feels like to need help and be too proud to ask for it." Ethan shook his head. "I was not too proud." Nathaniel smiled. "Exactly." That simple answer made Ethan pause. Nathaniel continued. "I have met executives who can manage thousands of employees but cannot sit with one frightened child for 10 minutes. I have met wealthy people who can donate millions but cannot give someone their time. You gave yours." Lily looked at her father with quiet pride. Ethan glanced around the room. Earlier, he had wanted only to get through the evening without embarrassing his daughter. Now he was standing in the same room where people had laughed at him, being offered the chance to turn his hardest years into something useful for others. He looked at Ryan. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Ryan slowly walked over. "Ethan." Ethan waited. Ryan swallowed. "I owe you an apology." Ethan did not answer immediately. Ryan continued. "I thought I knew what your life meant because I saw what you did for work. I never asked what it cost you to get here." Ethan looked at him steadily. "You do not have to explain." "I do," Ryan said. "Because I was wrong." The room remained quiet. Ethan finally nodded. "Thank you." Nothing more was needed. Nathaniel watched the exchange without interrupting. Then Ethan turned back toward the document. "I need to think about this." Nathaniel smiled. "Take all the time you need." Ethan looked down at Lily. "What do you think?" Lily's face brightened. "I think you would be good at helping people." Ethan smiled. "That sounds like a yes." "It sounds like you already know," Lily replied. A soft laugh moved through the room, gentle and unexpected. For the first time that evening, Ethan laughed too. But as Nathaniel gathered the papers, he quietly added one final sentence. "There is one more reason I chose you." Ethan looked up. Nathaniel's expression became serious. "Your wife once told me that if you ever found your way back to your old dreams, you should not be afraid to begin again." Ethan went completely still. He had never heard those words before. And suddenly, the offer on the table was no longer about money. It was about a second chance. The ballroom had begun to change. The same chandeliers still glowed above them. The same polished tables still reflected the warm light. But the feeling in the room was no longer the same. Ethan looked at the document again, then folded his hands quietly on the table. For years, he had trained himself not to expect second chances. He had learned to be grateful for steady work, a safe home, and the sound of Lily laughing in the kitchen. Yet now, after one unexpected evening, a door he had closed 12 years earlier had opened again. Nathaniel stood beside him. "You do not have to decide tonight." Ethan nodded. "I appreciate that." "I mean it," Nathaniel said. "If you choose to stay exactly where you are, I will respect that." Ethan looked at him. "You would?" "Of course." Nathaniel glanced toward Lily. A second chance only matters when you are free to choose it. Those words stayed with Ethan. He looked around the room. The people who had once known him as a young man with impossible plans were now seeing something different. Not a failure, not a success story, just a man who had kept going. Lily leaned closer. Dad, do you remember Mom saying you should build something again? Ethan smiled softly. She said a lot of things. You always listened to her. Ethan looked down. I did. Across the room, Ryan remained standing alone. He had no clever comment left. No audience waiting for another joke. After a moment, he approached Ethan again. Can I ask you something? Ethan nodded. Ryan glanced at Nathaniel, then back at him. Did you ever regret leaving that job? Ethan thought about it. The answer came slowly. I regretted losing opportunities. I never regretted being there for my family. Ryan lowered his eyes. I wish I had understood that earlier. Ethan gave him a small smile. Most people do. Ryan looked toward Lily. She is lucky to have you. Ethan answered, I am lucky to have her. The words were simple, but they carried everything. Nathaniel watched quietly. Then he placed the photograph from 12 years earlier beside the document. Your wife kept this, he said. She gave it to me because she wanted me to remember something. Ethan touched the edge of the photograph. What? Nathaniel smiled. She said you were always more interested in building things that lasted than things that impressed people. Ethan looked at the photograph again. His younger self was smiling beside a group of engineers, unaware of how quickly life would change. For a moment, he could almost hear his wife's voice. Not loud, not dramatic, just warm. Keep going. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Then he opened them and looked at Lily. What if we tried something new? Lily's face brightened. Does that mean Chicago? Ethan laughed softly. Maybe. Nathaniel smiled. There is no rush. Ethan picked up the document at last. He did not sign it. He simply held it in his hands. That was enough for tonight. Then the lights above the ballroom seemed to grow softer as conversations slowly resumed. But something had changed permanently. The people who had laughed at Ethan now spoke more carefully. They had learned that a quiet man could carry an extraordinary history without ever announcing it. And Ethan had learned something too. Sometimes dignity did not mean refusing a new door. Sometimes dignity meant having the courage to walk through it. The reunion was nearly over. The music had softened, the dinner tables were beginning to empty, and the laughter that had once filled the ballroom had become scattered conversations near the doors. Ethan stood beside Lily, holding the document Nathaniel had given him. He still had not signed it. He did not need to. For the first time in many years, he allowed himself to imagine a future without feeling guilty for wanting one. Nathaniel walked over and offered his hand. Whatever you decide, Ethan, I am proud of you. Ethan shook his hand. Thank you. Lily looked between them. Does that mean Dad gets a new job? Nathaniel smiled. It means your father gets to choose what comes next. Ethan looked at his daughter. And whatever we choose together. Lily nodded with complete confidence. Near the entrance, Ryan waited quietly. When Ethan walked past, Ryan stopped him. Ethan. Ethan turned. Ryan took a breath. I was wrong tonight. Ethan listened. I thought success was about being ahead of everyone else, Ryan continued. I thought if I had more, people would respect me more. He glanced toward the ballroom. Then I watched you stand there while everyone laughed, and you never once tried to prove yourself. Ethan gave him a calm look. You do not have to become someone else to be worthy of respect. Ryan nodded slowly. I know that now. Ethan offered his hand. Ryan accepted it. No applause followed. No dramatic speech was needed. Just two men acknowledging a truth that had arrived too late, but not too late to matter. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. Ethan and Lily walked down the stone steps toward his older Ford pickup. The parking lot lights reflected softly across the windshield. Lily climbed into the passenger seat and fastened her seat belt. Ethan stood beside the truck for a moment, looking back at the glowing windows of the country club. Earlier that night, he had entered those doors expecting to feel like a man who had been left behind. Now he understood something he had forgotten. He had never been behind. He had simply been walking a different road. Lily rolled down the window. Dad, yes. Are you happy? Ethan smiled. I think I am becoming happy. She laughed. That sounds complicated. Life is complicated. He climbed into the driver's seat. But sometimes it gives you another chance. They drove away beneath the quiet summer sky. Ethan did not know exactly what the next year would bring. He did not know whether he would move to Chicago, whether he would accept Nathaniel's offer, or how many families he might eventually help. But he knew one thing. His past had not been wasted. The years he had spent caring for his family had not made him less successful. They had made him the man Nathaniel had been searching for. Back inside the ballroom, Nathaniel stood near the window and watched the old pickup disappear down the road. He smiled quietly. The billionaire had not rescued Ethan. Ethan had never needed rescuing. Nathaniel had simply opened a door that Ethan had earned the right to walk through. And somewhere beyond the country club, a father and his daughter were driving toward a future neither of them could fully see yet. Sometimes grace does not arrive with noise. Sometimes redemption begins with a quiet decision. Sometimes the world laughs because it cannot see what a person carries inside. And sometimes, when the truth finally arrives, the room does not need applause. It simply becomes silent. Ethan had spent years proving nothing to anyone. That night, he finally understood the greatest lesson of all. Dignity does not need to shout. Kindness does not need recognition. And a second chance does not erase the past. It gives the past a purpose.